Hi, I'm Marjorie Rivera Domincio, and today we're going to discuss how humans acquire a language. So, how can we acquire language? According to John Locke, he argues that at birth, the mind is a tabula rasa, a blank slate that we fill with ideas as we experience the world through the five senses. According to the Linguistic Study of America, children acquire language through interaction, not only with their parents and other adults, but also with other children. All normal children who grow up in normal households surrounded by conversation will acquire the language that is being used around them. And it's just as easy for a child to acquire two or more language at the same time, as long as they are regularly interacting with speakers of those languages. It depends on the surrounding of a child how much input it gives to the children to acquire a language because the environment or the surrounding takes vital role in language acquisition of the children. If they absorb many inputs, then definitely they acquire more and increase their learning. On the other hand, if they absorb less input, the acquisition of children becomes limited and may block the children from learning. Children start to acquire the language and communicate from the people around us since the day we are born. Did you notice that when the baby is crying, it signals that he wants milk because he's hungry or he wants to clean his poo because he is being irritated? So to dive deeply, let's start to discuss what is language acquisition. Children acquire a system of grammatical rules. Why? Well, because once an infant has been familiarized with the sample of this language, a new sample or a sample from a different language is presented to the infant. Children extract their rules from the language they hear around them, all on their own, in effect, reinventing the grammar of mature speakers. So children are really good imitators, which they apply in forming a new word based on what they hear. Based on my observation and on my experience, particularly to my younger siblings, when they were young, they usually imitate or mimic the way I talk, pronounce, and utter words. So children exposed to different languages under the different cultural and social circumstances all develop their native language during a narrowed window of time, going through similar, possibly universal, developmental stages. So the capacity of the children in acquiring the language is based on their surrounding or environment, how much input is given to children, as I said a while ago. Children are equipped with an innate template or blueprint for language, which we have referred to as universal grammar, and that this blueprint aids the child in the task of constructing a grammar of her language. Based on what you can see in the picture or in the screen, there is a theory of Chomsky that each of us has a little black box, which he believes that it starts functioning when we are still infants. By the time we are 5 or 6, that device has enabled us to vacuum from our immediate environment a native language based on universal grammar. Here's what we need to learn and not. The input to the child is said to be impoverished, and this argument for the innateness of universal grammar is called the poverty of the stimulus. Structure dependency discussed in Module 3 refers to the fact that grammatical rules are dependent on hierarchical structure and not on order. So the rule that moves the auxiliary in English questions, example given, the boy is sleeping. Is the boy is sleeping? The boy who is sleeping was dreaming. Was the boy who is sleeping dreaming? Is the boy who is sleeping was dreaming? This is an example of transformational analysis which defined the as transformational process of the syntactic structures according to Chomsky. Transformational grammar can be best summarized by adding, deleting, moving, and substituting of words. These changes take place through the specific rules, which are called transformational rules. Recognizing that some sentences are related to each other is another part of our syntactic competence. The boy is sleeping. The boy is sleeping. So the first sentence is a declarative sentence, meaning that it asserts that a particular situation exists. The second sentence is a yes or no question, meaning that asks for confirmation of a situation. So the difference in meaning is indicated by different word orders, which means that certain structural differences correspond to certain meaning differences. For these sentences, the difference lies in where the auxiliary occurs in the sentence. Children come up with rules that moves the auxiliary of the main clause. Rather, the first auxiliary means that they know something about the hierarchical organization of sentences, something they were not provided with directly in the input. A pronoun can sometimes refer to a following noun phrase. Example given where he can refer to Billy. On the other hand, pronouns cannot co-refer. Example given when he lost the race, Billy was sad. He was sad when Billy lost the race. So ungrammatical na siya. In this one, the pronoun does not co-refer to any the noun phrase in the sentence. Once the local domain of the pronoun is identified, several syntactic constraints are applied to filter out invalid antecedent candidates. So two sets of rules are defined, one for reflexive pronouns and other for non-reflexive pronouns. The syntactic constraint for reflexive pronouns states that if the local domain of the pronoun is a verb phrase or a noun phrase that is composed of possessive noun or possessive form of noun. The reflexive anaphor can only co-refer to the candidates that are located in the same local domain. Another, if the local domain of the pronoun is an infinitive phrase, the reflexive anaphor cannot co-refer to any candidates that are located in the same local domain. So the syntactic constraint for non-reflexive pronouns states that the pronoun cannot co-refer to any candidates that are located in the same local domain, except when the anaphor is possessive pronoun, such as Peter loved his car. According to the innateness hypothesis, the child does not need to learn structure, dependency, or the pronoun rule, or any other universal principles of sentence formation, such as the rule that heads of categories can take complements. These aspects of grammar are part of the innate blueprints of language. Children acquire the language or languages they hear spoken in their community, not any random language. The child must learn the particular sounds and words of his language, as well as those grammatical rules specific to his language, as exemplified in the linguistic input, such as word order and movement rules, which is true because you cannot master other language if you cannot master your own first language or mother tongue. You can only master the language by using it. English-speaking children must also learn that yes or no questions are formed by moving the auxiliary, while Japanese children learn that to form a yes or no question, the morpheme ka is suffixed to a verb stem. As you can see in the screen, that is what that is example given. Tanaka ga sushi. I don't know how to if I pronounce it correctly, but I try. Tanaka ga sushi o tabete iro, sabi niya. Meaning, Tanaka is eating sushi. But when you form interrogative statement, then it becomes Tanaka ga sushi o tabiti iruka. Meaning, is Tanaka eating sushi? So children are able to acquire a complex grammar quickly and easily without any particular help beyond exposure to the language because they do not start from scratch. Innate principles of universal grammar, such as structure, dependency, and X-bar theory, among many others, provide them with a significant head start. Universal grammar constrains the kinds of grammatical rules children will formulate. It predisposes them to follow a restricted course of development that avoids many grammatical errors and give rise to uniform developmental stage, as we will discuss in the next section. The innateness hypothesis also predicts that all language will conform to universal grammar principles. Hypotheses may be revised based on new evidence, as in the case in any science. But there is little doubt that human language conforms to abstract universal principle and that the human brain is especially equipped for acquisition of human language grammar. Stages in language acquisition. So first is the perception and production of speech sounds. Infants will respond to visual depth and distance distinctions, to difference between rigid and flexible physical properties of objects, and to human faces rather than to other visual stimuli. So experiments demonstrate that infants will increase their stacking rate as measured by ingeniously designed pacifiers when the stimuli, visual or auditory, presented to them are varied, but will decrease the stacking rate when the same stimuli are presented repeated. Mahina yung signal. Going back, those instinctive responses can be used to measure a baby's ability to discriminate and recognize different linguistic stimuli. Adults find it difficult to differentiate between the allophones of a phoneme, but for infants, it comes naturally. Infants can perceive voicing contrast, such as pa versus ba, contrast in place of articulation, such as da versus ga, and contrast in manner of articulation, such as ra versus la, or ra versus wa among m. Infants are born with the ability to perceive just those sounds that are phonemic in some language. It is possible for them to learn any human language they are exposed to any others. So from around 6 months, they begin to lose the ability to discriminate between sounds that are not phonemic in his own language as his linguistic environment begins to shape his initial perception. So based on what you can see in the screen, I would like to share something. Based on my experience in my younger brother and sister and niece, as they want to tell something like, for example, mom, mom, they were asking for a water, and when they were asking for food. When they see their daddy and mommy, they utter mama and dada, respectively. When they see a toy car or a real car, they say broom broom. Therefore, while they're still young, they can already distinguish the sound or sounds depending on the object or things they see. The child's linguistic environment shapes not only the child's perception of his speech sounds, but also his production. Bubbling illustrates the readiness of the human mind to respond to linguistic input from a very early stage. Bubbling in hearing children and deaf children support the view that bubbling is a linguistic ability related to the kind of language input the child receives. The early bubbles consist mainly or repeated consonant vowel sequences like mama, gaga, and dada. So the infant will begin to produce these units, sounds or gestures depending on the language input the baby receives. So second is the first words, holoprastic or whole face phrase is staged because this one word utterance seems to convey the meaning of an entire sentence. So the child's first word may differ from the word of the adult language. The following words of the child, according to Jean Piaget, at the age of 16 months, illustrate the point. Not, no, don't, up. So this is just a review of what we've been learning in our previous discussion. So comprehension experiments confirm the hypothesis that children's reproductive abilities do not fully reflect their underlying grammatical competence. These babies develop their first sign earlier than hearing children speak their first word. This has led to the development of baby signs, a technique in which hearing parents learn and model for their babies various signs, such as signs for milk, hurt, and mother. So children have a remarkable ability to communicate. Children babble and coo and cry and vocally and non-vocally send message and receive message. So as they grow older, at the end of the first year, the children or my siblings start to imitate words and speak sounds and about this time use their first words. So about 18 months, their vocabulary in terms of words has increased and are beginning to use two-word or three-word utterances known as telegraphic utterances. About 2 years, children can comprehend an incredible quantity of linguistic input. They chatter nonstop. When they send to school age, children start to internalize increasingly complex structures, expand their vocabulary, and sharpen their communication skills as they also learn the social functions of their language. So third is segmenting the speech stream. Speech is a continuous stream broken only by breath pauses. So studies shows that infants are remarkably good at extracting information from continuous speech. They seem to know what kind of cues to look for in the input that will help them to isolate words. One of the cues that English speaking children use to figure out word boundaries is stress. So stress is very salient to infants, and they are quick to acquire the rhythmic structure of their language. Researchers have shown that as just few moments, sorry for the interruption, as just for the few moments, old infants are able to discriminate native and non-native stress patterns. So prosodic bootstrapping, infants can use the stress pattern of the language as a start to word learning. Infants are also sensitive to phonotactic constraints and to distribution of allophones in the target language. Study shows that younger infants, 7.5 months old, respond to frequency, while older infants, 9 months old, attend to stress, allophonic, and phonotactic information. So based on what you see in the screen, let's move on to the acquisition of phonology. So children can perceive more sound contrast than they can make in early stages. Thus, they know more about phonology that we can tell by listening to speak them, by listening to them speak. So according to John Piaget, the first words are generally monosyllabic with a consonant vowel form. So it appears that children first acquire the small set of sounds common to all languages, regardless of the ambient languages. and in later stages acquire the less common sounds of their own language. In general, the order of acquisition of classes of sound begins with vowels and then goes by manners of articulation for consonants. Nasals are acquired first, and then glides, stops, liquids, fricatives, and affricatives. So natural classes characterized by place of articulation features also appear in children's utterances according to a more or less ordered series. Labials, velars, alveolars, and palatal. It is not surprising that mama and dada are early words for many children. Controlled experiments shows that children at this stage can perceive or comprehend many more phonological contrasts than they produce. So let's read the conversation. Many anecdotal reports also show the disparity between the child's production and perception at this stage. An example is the change between a linguist and his 2-year-old son. At this age, the child's pronunciations of mouth is mouse. What does mouse mean? Like a cat, the child responds. The father, the father replies, yes, what else? The child responds, nothing else. So the father told, it's part of your head. Child fascinated, then the father touching mouth. What's this? Child says, mouse. So it took the child a few seconds to realize that his word for mouse and his word for mouth were the same. The child's first word shows many substitution of one features for another or one phoneme for another. In the preceding examples, mouth is pronounced mouse, with the alveolar fricatives replacing the less common interdental fricative. Light is pronounced light, with the glide replacing the liquid, and rabbit is pronounced as wabbit, with the glide replacing the liquid. So children's early pronunciation are not haphazard. However, the phonological substitutions are rule-based. This is the problem or the common problem of the student when they are reporting and when they only using their data. So let's continue. The following is an abridged lexicon for another child, Michael, between the ages of 18 and 21 months. This is how he pronounced some words. Example given, he pronounced spoon, he pronounced spoon as spoon, plane as pain, piece as piece, towel as towel, clean as thin, stroller as stroller, Michael as Michael, diaper as diaper, papi as patty, mommy as money, bird as bird, and big bird as bird. So I remember my niece, she's about 1 year old. He said to his mother, "Ma, pahingi ako pun. Ma, gusto ko ng pain. Matis kita." And I'm just I'm just like laughing all the time all the time she say that kind of words. So Michael systematically substituted the alveolar stop T for the velar stop K as in his words for cow, clean, kiss, and his own name. He also replaced labial T with T when it occurred in the middle of a word, as in his word for puppy and diaper. He reduced consonants cluster in spoon, plane, and stroller, and he the voice final stop as in big bird. In the voicing the final D in bird, he created an ambiguous form bird, referring both to bird and big bird. No wonder that only parents understand their children's first words. Michael's substitutions are typical of the phonological rules that operate in the very early stage of acquisition. Other common rules are reduplication, bottles become baba, water becomes wawa, and the dropping of final consonants, bed becomes be, keep becomes ke. These two rules shows that the children prefer simple consonant vowel syllables. Early phonological rules generally reflect natural phonological practices that also occur in adult language. Children do not create bizarre or whimsical rules. A child who observes a cat sitting on a mat also observes a mat supporting a cat, a mat under a cat, a floor supporting a mat and a cat, and so on. If the adult now says the cat is on the mat, even while pointing to the cat on the mat, how is the child to choose among this interpretation of the situation? So, even if a child succeeds in associating a word with an object, nobody provides explicit information about how to explain the use of that word to all the other objects to which that word refers. So children often overextend words' meaning. So a child may learn a word such as papa or daddy, which she first uses only for her own father, and then extend its meaning to apply to all men, just as she may use the word dog to mean any four-legged creature. So next is the acquisition of morphology. So the whole object principle, when a child learns a new word, he or he is likely to interpret the word to refer to a whole object rather than one of its parts. This principle and others will help the child learn 5,000 words per year. It has also been put forth that children can learn the meaning of verbs based on the syntactic environments of the verb. This is known as syntactic bootstrapping. So, children's errors in flexional morphology reveal that the child acquires the regular rules of the grammar and then over-applies them. This overgeneralization occurs when children treat irregular verbs and nouns as if they were regular. We have probably all heard children say bring, go, grow, and run, or foot, mouses, and ships. These mistakes tell us much about how children learn language because such forms did not arise through imitation. In fact, children go through three stages in the acquisition of an irregular form. Stage 1, broke, growth. Stage 2, break, bring. Stage 3, broke, growth. So in stage 1, the child uses the correct terms such as growth or broke. Stage 2 is crucial because children look for general patterns. During stage 3, the child learns that there are exemptions to the rule and then once again uses broke and broke, with the difference being that these irregular forms will be related to the root form. So children were shown a drawing of a nonsense animal, like the funny creature shown in the picture or in the screen, was given a nonsense name. The experimenter would then say to the child pointing to the picture, "This is wow." So for example, Italian verbs must be inflected for number and person to agree with the subject. This is similar to the English agreement rule. Add s to the verb for third person, singular for third person. Singular subjects, he giggles a lot but we giggle a lot, except that in Italian more verb forms must be acquired. Italian speaking children between the ages of 1 to 10, 1 year and 10 months, and 2 years and 4 months correctly inflect the verb as the following utterances of Italian children show. So, another, children as young as 2 years old respect disagreement requirements when producing noun phrase as shown by the following Italian example. In English, for example, we can derive verbs from nouns. From the noun microwave, we now have a verb to microwave. From the noun electronic, meal, we derive the verb to email. Children acquire this deriva- derivational rule early and uses it often because there are lots of gaps in their verb vocabulary. The acquisition of morphology clearly demonstrates the rule-governed nature of language acquisition. Children typically learn a morphological rule and then overgeneralize. Children go through three stages, as I said a while back, stages in the acquisition of an irregular form. In phase one, they use the standard irregular past tense forms because they have learned these irregulars as separate lexical items. In phase two, the child has learned the rule for past tense and therefore attach the regular past tense morpheme to the irregular verb. And in phase three, the child realized that there are exemptions to the morphological rule and bring the standard irregular forms back into their vocabulary. So the acquisition of syntax. When a child is still in the holoprastic stage, adults listening to the one-word utterances often feel that the child is trying to convey a more complex message. So experimental techniques shows that at this stage and even earlier, children have knowledge of some syntactic rules. Research shows that children as young as 17 months can understand the difference between sentences such as Ernie is tickling Bert and Bert is tickling Ernie. Because these sentences have all the same words, the child cannot be relying on the words alone to understand the meaning. He must also understand the word order rules and how they determine the grammatical relations of subject and object. So the following utterances illustrate the kinds of patterns that are found in children utterances at this stage too. Organ sack, babay boat, more wet, Catherine sack, hi mommy, organ sticky, eat both, dirty. So these utterances can express a variety of semantic and syntactic relations. For example, the noun plus noun sentences such as mommy, sak can express a subject plus object relation in the situation when the mother is putting the sack on the child, or a possessive relation when the child is pointing to mommy sock. Two words can also be used to show a subject locative relation, as in sweater chair to mean the sweater is on the chair, or to show an attribution as dirty sock. Children often have a variety of modifiers such as ogan, more, and babay. So researchers use the child's mean length of utterances or MLU to measure progress. MLU is the average length of the utterances the child is producing at a particular point. MLU is usually measured in terms of morphemes, so words like boys, dance, and crying each have a value of 2 morphemes. So children with the same MLU or VPU are likely to have similar grammars even though they are different ages. Multi-word utterances. Children are inconsistent in their use of function words, grammatical morphemes such as a and the subject pronouns like I, and we auxiliary verbs such as can and is, and in some language verbal inflection. During this stage, children uh, children often sound as if they are sending a text message or reading an old-fashioned telegram, which contains only the required words for basic understanding. Such utterances are sometimes called telegraphic speech, and we call this the telegraphic stage of the child's language development. So, example given. Cat stands up table. What that? He play little tune. Andrew want that. Cathy build the house. No sit there. Ride truck. Show mommy that. So the child does not deliberately leave out function word as would an adult sending a tweet. The sentences reflect the child's linguistic capacity at the particular stage of language development. So telegraphic speech is due to performance limitations since there is an upper limit on the length utterance a child can produce. And function morphemes are less important to comprehension. They are omitted. So telegraphic speech is an early grammatical stage similar to adult speech in languages like Italian or Spanish that allows subject pronouns to be dropped, as in hablo English or speak English, or Chinese language which lack many types of determinants. So the correct use of word order, case, marking, and agreement rules shows that even though children may often omit functions morphemes, they are aware of constituent structures and syntactic rules and dependencies, which, as in adult grammar, may be represented with the simplified non-X bar phrase structure tree. So let's proceed to the acquisition of syntax. So semantic bootstrapping, the notion that it means that the children first use the meaning of a word to figure out its syntactic category. So the child may have rules such as if a word refers to a physical object, it's noun, or if a word refers to an action, it's verb, and so on. However, the rules that link certain meanings to specific categories are not full. For example, the word action denotes an action, but it is not a verb. No is not an action, but is a verb, and justice is a noun, though it is a physical object. But the rules that drive semantic bootstrapping might be helpful for the kind of word children learn early on, which tend to refer to object and actions. Word frames may also help the child to determine when words belong to some category. So the most frequent frames typically consist of function words, determiners such as the and a, the pronouns like it and one. This suggests that children can learn from function morphemes in the input even though they omit these elements in their own speech. Have begun to produce and understand complex structures. Sorry for the interruption again. So going back, the most frequent frames typically consist of function words, determiners such as the and a or a, and pronouns like it and one. So this suggests that children can learn from function morphemes in their input even though they omit these elements in their own speech. So they have begun to produce and understand complex structures, including coordinated sentences and embedded sentences of various kinds, such as the following. He was stuck and I got him out. I want this doll because she's big. I know what to do. I like to play with something else. I think she's sick. Look at that train. Ursula boat. I gon' make it like a rocket to blast off with. It's too early for us to eat. So let's proceed to the acquisition of pragmatics. In addition to acquiring the rules of grammar, children must learn the appropriate use of language in context or pragmatics. So the cartoon is funny because of the inappropriateness of the interaction, showing that Dewey hasn't completed acquired the pragmatic maxim of conversation. So context is needed to determine the references or pronouns. The speaker and listener form part of the context of an utterance. This is what I've been referring. So children also show a lack of pragmatic awareness in the way they sometimes use articles. So in a discourse, the indefinite article a or and an must be used for the first mention of a new referent, but the definite article or pronoun may be used in subsequent mention as illustrated the following. So a boy walked into the class. He was in the wrong room. The teacher directed the boy to the right class. So implicatures are another part of pragmatics that young children have difficulty with. It may take a child several months or years to master those aspects of pragmatics that involve the felicitous use of determiners and pronouns, or the conversational maxims which, when violated, usually purposely, result in implicature. Other aspects of pragmatics are acquired very clearly. So, to sum up, language acquisition is extremely complex, yet children already know most of the grammar of their native languages before they are 5 years old. Children acquire language without being taught and the rules of grammar by their parents, in part because parents don't consciously know the many of the rules of grammar. So, as I said a while back, small babies, children babble and coo and cry and vocally and non-vocally send messages and receive messages. So end of first year, children start to imitate word and speech sounds and about this time use their first words. 18 months, their vocabulary in terms words has increased are beginning to use two-word or three-word utterances known as telegraphic utterances. 3 years, children can comprehend an incredible quantity of linguistic input. They chatter nonstop. So school-age children start to internalize increasingly complex structures, expand their vocabulary, and sharpen their communication skills, and they also learn the social function of their language. So, in acquisition of phonology, children tend to acquire the sounds common to all languages first, followed by the less common of their own group. Next is acquisition of phonology. When children learn the meaning of words, they must learn the relevant feature of the class of things that are referred to that word. So the acquisition syntax. At about 2 years age, children start to put words together to form two-word utterances. The intonation structure is all the two words as a unit, and the two-word utterances can convey a range of meaning. So, and last but not the least, acquisition of pragmatics or the deixis. Children often have problems with the shifting referent of pronouns. So problems with context-dependent structure of deictic words. And that would be, and that's all for today. And thank you for your listening. I hope I received many feedback from my classmates. And Sign out.